Magic 1978. 20 weird facts you didn't know. There's something deeply unsettling about a man talking to a puppet. Not because it's strange, but because sometimes the puppet talks back. When Magic quietly emerged in 1978, it didn't roar like a typical horror film. It murmured. It lingered. And then it stayed long after the credits rolled. With Anthony Hopkins playing the fractured mind of Corky Withers and a wooden dummy named Fats speaking lines that felt too sharp, too personal, the film became less about ventriloquism and more about how easily identity can be shared, borrowed, or stolen. It wasn't marketed as a possession film, but for those who saw it, especially behind the camera, it never felt like just performance. Rumors followed the production from day one, of Hopkins slipping into voice before call time, of crew members refusing to be alone with Fats, and of scenes that couldn't be explained, not because they were scripted, but because they weren't. The unease wasn't in what was shown. It was in what no one could fully account for, and that unease still lingers. Why did Hopkins speak of this film less than any other in his career? Why was one version of the ending locked away without explanation? And why, after all these years, are pieces of the dummy still surfacing when it was supposed to be destroyed? Magic is a story of fractured control, of voices that don't always belong to you, and of the things we bring to life that refuse to let us go. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Magic 1978, a film where reality was the first thing to disappear. Fact 1. The opening scene was never meant to succeed. The first time we see Corky perform on stage, he stumbles, his hands shake, his words slur. What looks like a nervous breakdown was exactly that, but not from the character, from the actor. That scene wasn't rehearsed traditionally. Richard Attenborough, the director, made a quiet decision. Anthony Hopkins would go in cold. No prepped lines, no reshoots. He instructed the crew to film Hopkins attempting a real magic routine live for the very first time. The result was discomforting. Hopkins failed to deliver clean sleight of hand. His lines came out jumbled. But instead of cutting, Attenborough let the camera linger, capturing a man unraveling under pressure. What no one expected was the emotional resonance it unearthed. Hopkins later admitted the moment echoed a forgotten trauma, his first failed audition in drama school. The scene was never about magic. It was about revealing a crack in the foundation of Corky's psyche before the audience even knew it existed. Attenborough had no interest in polished illusion. He wanted the fear of losing control on film and possibly off it. And so, the opening number wasn't scripted to succeed. It was designed to break. Fact 2. The mirror scene was never written but couldn't be removed. There's a moment early on when Corky practices his act in front of a mirror, switching voices between himself and Fats with chilling ease. It's hypnotic, disorienting. But here's the truth. That scene wasn't in the shooting script. One afternoon, Hopkins began experimenting on set between takes. A second unit camera had been left running. The footage revealed him holding a full conversation with Fats without realizing the crew was still watching. His eyes moved, his voice shifted, but his mouth stayed almost perfectly still. Even the editors couldn't pinpoint when the character changed. The scene was presented to Attenborough, who insisted it remain untouched. No edits, no direction. What we see in the film is Hopkins falling into a rhythm of two minds that almost seems involuntary. When later asked what he was thinking during that moment, Hopkins replied, "I don't remember saying anything at all." So who did? Fact 3. The dummy got a trailer before the lead did. Most productions joke about their stars being divas, but on the set of Magic, it wasn't the human actors drawing unusual attention, it was the dummy. In the first week of shooting, the crew assigned a private trailer to Fats. What began as a half-serious nod to Hopkins' request for method continuity turned into something far more serious. He insisted the dummy be kept in a temperature-controlled space, not handled like a prop, and transported upright at all times. No lying down, no storage crates, as if disrespecting the puppet would somehow disrespect the character and, by extension, himself. Soon, Fats had his own call sheet, a dedicated assistant, a lighting test schedule. Production staff were told not to joke in his presence, even off camera, and when one crew member mocked the dummy by moving its mouth during a break, they were reassigned the next day without explanation. But the most disturbing moment came weeks later. A security guard making rounds after hours found Fats seated upright in the director's chair facing the empty set. No one claimed responsibility. The chair hadn't been moved. Was it a prank? An oversight? Or had everyone already agreed without saying it that the dummy had earned his place? Fact 4. The dinner scene was based on something that actually happened. One of the first moments that makes viewers question whether Corky is fully in control comes during a seemingly simple dinner scene where he appears to answer questions before they're even asked. His timing is unnatural, tout précis, almost predictive. This wasn't clever screenwriting. The idea came directly from something that unnerved the crew off camera. During a break between scenes, Hopkins, still in costume, still using Fats's voice, began speaking to the director and makeup artist simultaneously. He responded to their comments before either of them could finish speaking. At first, it seemed like luck, but the frequency increased. A half-dozen people on set witnessed the same pattern. Hopkins seemed to know what they were about to say. Later that night, Attenborough rewrote a dinner scene to reflect this uncanny rhythm, slipping in dialogue that mirrored what the actor had done earlier, unscripted. Hopkins brushed it off. "I was just listening hard," he said, but no one else felt it was just listening. It was the kind of timing you can't teach, or maybe the kind you don't want to. And when you're acting opposite a puppet, who exactly is feeding you the lines? Fact 5. A veteran camera operator walked off and never came back. There's a close-up scene in Magic that lasts only a few seconds on screen. Fats turning toward Corky and whispering something indecipherable. But the real story lies behind the camera. The director of photography had scheduled the shot as a simple one-light, medium zoom, a routine capture. But during the first take, the camera operator, an industry professional with decades of experience, froze mid-shot. He continued filming, but when the take ended, he lowered the rig and walked off set. He didn't say a word. Hours later, a handwritten note was found near the monitor station. It read, "I don't know what that was, but it was looking back." No formal explanation was ever given. The operator was quietly replaced by the next day. The footage? Perfectly framed, perfectly lit, but something about it left even the editors uneasy. They cut the scene down in post not for pacing, but because, as one crew member put it, you start to feel watched after about 5 seconds. Is it possible for an inanimate object to break the fourth wall in real life? Fact 6. Anne-Margret refused to rehearse with the dummy alone. When Anne-Margret joined the cast as Peggy, she was told she'd be working with one of the finest actors of her generation and a well-crafted puppet. No one warned her that the puppet might steal every scene. Initially amused by Fats, she quickly grew wary. In several rehearsals, she claimed the dummy seemed to respond before Hopkins had even activated him. Once, during a love scene rehearsal, she paused midline and swore she heard a sharp exhale from across the room. Fats was seated alone on a stool. No one was near him. She immediately requested that all rehearsals involving Fats include a full room. No one-on-one blocking, no silent run-throughs. At first, people rolled their eyes. But when the sound technician confirmed unexplained ambient shifts during dummy scenes, the jokes stopped. In an interview years later, Anne-Margret reflected on the film, "There's acting, there's method, and then there's whatever that was." Some performances demand chemistry, others demand witnesses. Fact 7. The outburst scene left the crew in shock, and no one called cut. There's a pivotal moment in Magic when Corky erupts screaming, shaking, and violently shifting into a voice that clearly isn't his own. What appears to be a masterclass in psychological acting was far closer to a meltdown. The scene had been planned as a controlled outburst, carefully blocked for camera and sound, but Hopkins had a different plan. He warned Attenborough in advance, "If I lose the thread, don't stop me." What followed was an explosive monologue entirely improvised, completely unrestrained. His voice cracked, his eyes glazed, and for nearly 4 minutes, he spoke with venom, heartbreak, and something else, something cold. Not a single person on set interrupted. No one dared. The sound mixer missed a cue. The assistant director forgot to slate the shot. Everyone just stood there watching a man seemingly argue with a voice inside his own head. Attenborough kept the camera rolling. In the final cut, the scene was trimmed. Not because it was bad, but because the full version reportedly made some test viewers physically uncomfortable. The moment Corky finishes, he whispers, "He's right, you know?" No one ever clarified who he was. Fact order. Burgess Meredith refused to return to the studio for a reason he wouldn't name. Veteran actor Burgess Meredith brought gravitas to the role of Ben Green, Corky's relentless agent. But what many fans don't realize is that after principal photography ended, he declined to return for post-production audio work. ADR sessions where actors re-record lines for clarity are standard practice. Meredith initially agreed, but days before the scheduled session, he backed out. No explanation, just a short call to the producers, "I'm done with the dummy." The studio offered to reschedule. He refused. Eventually, Attenborough made the call to use the original on-set recordings, imperfections and all. It wasn't until years later that a crew member revealed Meredith had confessed off the record. There's something about that puppet's voice. When it talks, it sticks with you. He never publicly elaborated, but even decades later, Magic remained one of the only films he refused to discuss in interviews. Sometimes, the smallest characters leave the biggest scars. Fact 9. Hopkins began referring to himself in the third person. By the middle of production, something odd had begun to happen. Hopkins no longer used I when talking about his role. He'd say things like, "Corky doesn't like that line," or "He thinks it's too soon for that reveal." At first, the cast and crew chalked it up to intense immersion. After all, method acting demands full embodiment. But the line between character and actor kept shifting and never back in the direction of normal. One script supervisor noticed that even in casual conversation, Hopkins would refer to himself in plural. "We think that's stronger in the second take." Someone joked that he and Fats were co-directing now. No one laughed. Then came a dinner with Attenborough, where Hopkins insisted a seat be left open. When asked why, he simply replied, he doesn't like to sit on the floor. The seat remained empty. The table remained silent. Whether it was method or madness, no one could say. But one thing became disturbingly clear. The more Hopkins spoke, the less alone he sounded. Fact 10. The lake scene wasn't working because the dummy refused to drown. There's a turning point in the film where Corky, in a desperate act of separation, attempts to dispose of Fats by throwing him into the lake. It's symbolic, it's heavy, but what you don't see on screen is just how difficult it was to film because the dummy simply wouldn't stay down. Fats had been designed with removable ballast for various scenes. For the lake shot, weights were added to ensure a clean submersion, but take after take, he bobbed back to the surface, sometimes face up, sometimes facing the actor. Every time, the crew grew more uncomfortable. More weight was added. Ropes were considered. One prop assistant half-jokingly suggested exorcism. Eventually, Attenborough changed the blocking. Rather than Corky succeeding in getting rid of the puppet, the final cut leaves the moment incomplete Fats above water, clinging to the surface like something that refuses to be erased. It's a small change, but one that carries weight. The idea that even when cast into the depths, some things simply come back, or never leave in the first place. Fact 11. The set had an unwritten rule: never work past midnight. In most productions, night shoots are inevitable, but on the Magic set, a strange pattern emerged, a noticeable drop in morale and cooperation. After 11 p.m., grip teams got jittery. The lighting crew worked faster than usual. Sound operators requested earlier wrap. When questioned, several crew members admitted they felt something was off after dark, specifically around the puppet. One gaffer claimed Fat's head moved slightly during a break. Another swore they heard a whisper near the dummy when the set was otherwise silent. Nothing was ever confirmed. There were no official reports, but a shift happened. The call sheet began to reflect an unofficial curfew. No scenes with the dummy scheduled past midnight. No puppet setups logged after late hours. People stopped joking about it. They simply followed the rule. Sometimes, fear doesn't need explanation to be respected. It only needs repetition. Fact 12. Hopkins blocked himself against himself. One of the most physically jarring scenes in Magic shows Corky violently confronting Fats, an actor in battle with a puppet. But during filming, choreographers noticed a problem. Hopkins wasn't following the staged fight. He was dodging punches that hadn't been thrown and countering movements he wasn't supposed to anticipate. In short, he was reacting like someone facing a real opponent. The fight director, confused, pulled him aside. Hopkins reportedly replied, "I can't help it. He knows what I'm going to do." The wording unsettled the crew. Rehearsals were scrapped. The scene was redesigned to accommodate Hopkins' unpredictable rhythm, letting Fats win, while Corky appeared to crumble from exhaustion. In the final edit, the sequence plays like a descent into madness. But behind the scenes, no one could shake the sense that the actor was responding to more than just choreography. That kind of instinct isn't learned. It's shared. Fact 13. The most haunting monologue was never meant to last that long. Deep into the story, Fats delivers a monologue long, venomous, and eerily coherent. It's a speech about loyalty and control, but also something darker: dependency. It's the point where the dummy stops sounding like a voice in Corky's head and starts sounding like the dominant one. The original scene was scripted for under 2 minutes. Hopkins extended it to nearly 8, unbroken, uninterrupted, and deeply unsettling. He didn't tell anyone he was going to do it. He just kept going. What's more chilling is how natural it felt. The voice change, the breath control, the way Hopkins tilted his head slightly, mimicking Fat's posture. Crew members on set watched in silence as the performance stretched far beyond the call sheet and no one stepped in. One camera assistant later described the moment he stopped acting and started channeling. Attenborough used only a portion of the take in the final cut. The rest, he admitted, was too real to be cinematic. But the very last line improvised, never written, remained. He's always right. The question no one dared ask was, who is he? Fact 14. Whispers were heard in the sound mix and no one could trace them. Sharp-eared viewers of Magic often report hearing faint background whispers in scenes where Corky is alone. They're not in the script, they're not in the subtitles. And according to the official sound logs, they were never added. The audio engineer in charge initially assumed it was static interference, but cleaning the channels didn't help. The whispers remained low, rhythmic, almost conversational. One day, he tried playing a portion of the track backward. In the static, he claimed to hear a single phrase repeated twice. "Don't leave me." No one else confirmed the discovery, but that version of the track was removed from circulation and never used in the theatrical cut. When asked why, the technician simply said, "I didn't want that voice following me home." Even now, the whispers can occasionally be heard in certain home releases, barely audible, but unmistakably human. Fact 15. Blood appeared during a scene, and no one knew where it came from. During one of the most violent scenes in Magic, Corky lashes out with unfiltered rage. The scene required careful blocking, fake blood capsules, and safety rehearsals. Everything was in place, until something unexpected happened. After the first take, the floor was slick with blood, real blood, not corn syrup, not stage red. Medical staff were called in. No injuries were found, all squibs were accounted for and unused. No one on set had a cut, a scratch, or even a bruise. The production froze. Footage was reviewed, rechecked frame by frame. Nothing revealed the source. And yet, the blood was there. They cleaned the set, reshot the sequence. No further issues occurred. But when the scene was finally edited, a few frames from the first take were kept just long enough to preserve the original intensity. The line Hopkins delivers right before the strike, "He warned you," but no scriptwriter could confirm who he was written to be. Fact 16. Hopkins left a warning on his trailer door and no one tested it. Actors make unusual requests during intense shoots, but late into production on Magic, Hopkins made one that no one expected. He taped a handwritten note on the outside of his trailer door. It read, "Do not place Fats inside, ever." There had been no reported pranks, no official reason, just a sudden, visible boundary. At first, people assumed it was a joke, an actor protecting his process. But Hopkins didn't smile when asked about it. He simply said, he doesn't like surprises. The note remained for the rest of the shoot. And although no one admitted to it, there were whispers that, earlier that week, someone had moved the dummy into his trailer between takes, only to find it repositioned the next morning. From that point forward, not a single person touched Fats without explicit instruction. Even production assistants began addressing him indirectly. Should I bring him? Method acting or something else? No one could say. But whatever line existed between the actor and the puppet, it had been drawn, literally, in ink, and no one dared cross it again. Fact 17. 2 endings were shot and 1 was buried. The version of Magic most audiences know ends with ambiguity. Corky collapses, Fats goes silent, and the credits roll with more questions than answers. But that wasn't the only ending shot. An alternative version existed, one far more unnerving. In it, after Corky dies, the camera lingers. Fats remains seated and begins to speak. Alone, no cuts, no music. Just the dummy's voice, faint and steady, whispering words that weren't in the script. Test audiences reportedly reacted with unease, and one viewer fainted. The footage was immediately pulled from distribution consideration. Executives labeled it tonally disruptive, but the crew knew better. The footage wasn't disturbing because it was dark, it was disturbing because it felt unrehearsed. That version was sealed, logged, and never released. Attenborough never spoke publicly about it, and no one could confirm whether the voice at the end was overdubbed or recorded live on set. The final question wasn't who survived, it was who kept talking after everyone else had stopped. Fact 18. The dummy was destroyed, but something survived. At the end of production, it was decided that Fats should be dismantled. Whether for symbolic closure or practical reasons, no one knows. The puppet had become too charged, too entangled with the shoot. A controlled burn was scheduled, photos were taken, witnesses were present, and yet, within 5 years, pieces began to resurface. A jaw hinge labeled M78F was discovered in a Hollywood prop warehouse. A right hand identical in sculpt and wear was seen in the background of another studio tour. But the most unsettling reappearance came during a 1991 Hopkins exhibit, a glass eye, mounted in a display case, labeled simply, "Unidentified prop." When asked about it, Hopkins paused, then replied, "I don't remember keeping anything." No official replica was ever made. No backups were documented. And yet, the parts remained scattered, cataloged, and quietly passed around. Some objects burn. Others linger. Fact 19. Hopkins avoided talking about magic for over a decade and never said why. Anthony Hopkins is known for embracing his legacy, reflecting on past roles, revisiting characters, and speaking candidly about process. But for reasons never fully explained, magic was the exception. In the years following the film's release, Hopkins gave only a handful of interviews that even mentioned it. He praised the directing, complimented his co-stars, but refused to elaborate on the experience. When directly asked about magic in a 1985 roundtable, he cut the question short with a single line: "Some things are better left as they are." Insiders close to the production say his silence was not rooted in shame, nor in dissatisfaction but in discomfort. One former assistant noted that during filming, Hopkins seemed less interested in performing and more absorbed in not letting the other voice take over. Whether he meant fats or something else was never clarified. It wasn't until the late 1990 seconds that Hopkins began acknowledging magic again, but only as part of retrospectives. Even then, his comments were brief, controlled, almost cautious. For an actor who once gave a TED-style breakdown of Hannibal Lecter's breathing patterns, his distance from magic remains one of the great unspoken voids in his career. And sometimes, the silence says more than the performance. Fact 20. The film's original tagline was altered to avoid panic. When magic was first test marketed to regional audiences, it carried a striking tagline: "You won't believe what he says, and neither will he." The phrase was chilling, clever, and according to internal studio notes, immediately problematic. Focus groups responded with unexpected unease. Several viewers believed the line hinted not just at schizophrenia, but at possession. Some interpreted it as spiritual horror, and religious organizations began contacting distributors with concerns. Worried about alienating conservative markets, the studio quietly pulled the tagline. It was replaced with a more generic phrase, "A terrifying love story." But those who saw the original campaign never forgot it. And in some rare vintage posters and lobby cards, the first version still survives, faded but visible. Years later, collectors began noticing subtle differences between early promotional materials and the final theatrical branding. A few even claim that the studio actively tried to buy back early prints, especially in international markets. What were they trying to avoid? Perhaps the tagline came too close to the truth. Bonus fact: the last time Fats was seen, he said something he shouldn't have. After the final scene was shot, after the crew had packed up, and after Hopkins had left the lot for the last time, there remained one final duty: photographing and tagging props for inventory. A junior assistant was assigned to catalog the dummy. Fats was seated upright, arms down, eyes fixed forward. The assistant took 3 Polaroids. Routine, quiet. It was only later, while filing the prints, that he noticed something odd. In the final image, Fat's mouth is slightly open, not in mid-speech, not during movement, just slightly parted, like the frame caught something it shouldn't have. On the back of that photo, written in the assistant's own handwriting, was a line no one could explain: "He thanked me." The assistant didn't remember writing it. He claimed he'd been alone, that the shoot had gone by the book, and that no one, certainly not him, had heard anything unusual. But something about the handwriting looked rushed, off balance, like it was written quickly, with unease. 2 weeks later, the assistant left the industry. The photo was stored in a props archive, but when the studio digitized its collection years later, that particular Polaroid was missing, not misfiled. Missing. The only thing that remained was the log entry, and 5 shaky letters penciled next to it. Voice? Was it a prank? A nervous misinterpretation? Or, after everything, did someone finally hear the dummy say something without help? Some films haunt because of what's on screen. Magic lingers because of what slipped through the cracks, what was whispered, not written, and what moved when no one was watching. So tell us, was this just a brilliant performance tangled in superstition? Or did magic tap into something the script could never name? Which moment blurred the line for you? And if given the chance, would you sit in a room with Fats alone? Leave your thoughts below. Some voices don't fade in silence, they wait for someone to answer.